Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I am going to have a discussion with myself that you can watch, which is basically called YouTubing. Well, it is for me anyway, about who is the best band of all time. Now, I've done this before. I've done it many a time. But I'm not the only person who attempts to do these sorts of things. There's other people who have a go. And those very clever and knowledgeable people at Billboard magazine, they've come up with the 50 greatest bands ranked from 50 to 1. So what I'm going to be doing on this video is I am going to, well, basically do the job properly for them because they got it all wrong and there's no two ways about it. They got it wrong. So I will be going through, I'm not going to do all 50. I'm going to look at the top 20. And then I will be critiquing that for you. So if you have a short attention span and don't like to have, the idea of good and bad and what is quality in music questioned in any way, and you just want to stick to what you know, then just watch the first list. You can find out, what Billboard magazine said without having to actually look it up on the internet or doing any reading. I'll do that for you, right? And then once we've got that done, I will start critiquing it. And I will look at the bands they missed out in their top 50 and then try and get an idea of how I would do the list. Whether I would do my list based upon their list today, I don't know. Shall we see how it goes? Shall we start off? Yeah, shall we start? Good. Right. So I'll do this this countdown, not in the way I would do it over an hour. I'm going to do this quite quickly and in sort of 1980s top of the pop style, or if you're in America, like Casey Kasem. Remember, that was the Billboard top 10, wasn't it? So that all makes sense. So shall we have a go then? Here we go. Cue the music. So, at number 20, we've got those grumpy posh boys, Radiohead. At number 19, we have those surfing Beach Boys. They're Beach Boys, but I don't think they actually were Beach Boys, which is quite ironic, but that's who we've got at number 19. At number 18, we've got The Clash, the critics' favourite of the English punk bands, probably because Joe Strummer was a bit of a posh boy. At 17, we've got Heart. Yes, the Wilson sisters, Anne and Nancy. What a great singer. At number 16, we've got the Grateful Dead. And we're not grateful that they're dead, although many of them are. At number 15, we've got Talking Heads. Now, I'm a Talking Head, but I'm not a member of the band Talking Heads, but David Byrne is. At number 14, we've got Creedence Clearwater Revival. And I'm sure when they play, there'll be a bad moon arising. At 13, we've got those rockers from down under, AC/DC. At number 12, we've got Metallica. Yeah, rock and roll. At number 11, we've got, from England, The Who. Don't let them get a hold of your guitar, because they'll smash it up. At number 10, we've got those grumpy grungers, Nirvana. At number 9, all the way from Birmingham, England, we've got Black Sabbath. At number 8, funkin' and a pluckin' and a poppin', we got Sly and the Family Stone. At number 7, all the way from Ireland, we've got those Irish lads, U2, with Bono on vocals, The Edge on guitar, and then two guys with normal names on the other instruments. At number 6, we've got the great Fleetwood Mac. Now, which one was it? Was it the great blues Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green? Or was it the much more successful goat strangling Fleetwood Mac with Stevie Nicks? Yeah. Oh, I've lost my place now. This is going well. At number 5, all the way from England again, because all the best bands come from there, it seems, we've got Queen, Freddie Mercury, Brian May, John Deacon, and Roger Taylor. At number 4, we've got those posh proggers, Pink Floyd. At number 3, rocking and a rolling and a rumping and a tumping and causing chaos and mayhem wherever they go, we've got Led Zeppelin. At number 2, we've got the original hard rocking band, all the way from London, England. They're all from London, everybody. Why is this? We got the Rolling Stones, and you've guessed it, at number one, the greatest band of all time is the Beatles. Oh, God, that was wearing me out, that was. Okay, so that's the list. That's the top 20 bands there. Okay, now, let's start going through who's not on the list, which is going to be the meat and potatoes, and asking why they're not on the list, okay? Now, the problem we have here, to start off with, is categories are always never robust enough, really, to make any sort of truth statement on. And that is true of the name band. A band, what is a band? You know, there's some people are bands in bands, aren't they? Other people are solo artists. But there's a grey area, because sometimes you get bands that is named after the solo artist, but the people in that band are fixed and they add to that sound. And you think of that unit as being the unit that it is. So the best example of this is the most obvious band missing from this list, and it's the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And I'm being very specific here. Jimi Hendrix, Noel Redding on bass, and the drummer. God, how can I... Mitch Mitchell on drums. God, Andy. So I would say that the Jimi Hendrix Experience is a band. And I think their importance is those three musicians. And I think those three all contributed to that band creatively. It was a band in exactly the same way as Cream was. Now, Jimi Hendrix aren't on this list because they haven't thought of it as a band. They thought of Jimmy as a solo artist. Now, I would say by the time Jimmy got to Electric Ladyland, he was a solo artist. But, and I've come to this conclusion doing this channel and thinking a lot about this, I'm starting to realise the monumentalness of the debut album, Are You Experience? And I'm going to be going into depth about this. And this video will be followed up where I have, how would you say, I will ruminate on whether Jimi Hendrix was responsible for the Beatles not being very good anymore and having to stop, which I think he was. That's how important the Jimi Hendrix Experience is. So, it's quite obvious why Jimmy's not on the list, but it's incredible that there is no Cream on this list in the top 50. When I say they're not on the list, I'm not talking about the top 20. I'm talking about the top 50. Now, before Cream, bands were usually formed by mates and they got together and they weren't virtuosos. They just sort of pulled a band together and they went out and gigged and they got successful and all that type of thing. And they existed in a realm where these lads were being picked up. This has always happened in rock and roll and it happens in pop music. The lads would be picked up because they're photogenic, you know, and, you know, they're like, the girls like them. And that's what a band is. And that sort of teeny bopper band is what the Beatles started off like. The Stones were like it. Cream were a different beast. Cream were made of three incredible musicians that were actually pioneering on their instruments. They were able to extemporize at a level that was like jazz improvisation. And in doing that and taking the seeds of rock and roll and applying them in a certain way, Cream laying the groundwork for hard rock, heavy metal, prog rock, and jazz rock fusion. That's pretty important in my book, and yet they didn't get on the list. Billboard, not right, okay? Now, there's another type of band that doesn't get on this list, and it's all about category of band, because there's less soul and funk bands on here. Where's Earth, Wind and Fire? Where's the Ohio Players? You know, they've got Parliament Funkadelic on, but there's a lot less soul and funk bands. They've got Sly and the Family Stone, as you saw, was in the top 20, which is very interesting. So you can see categories make a difference. But what about a band like Kraftwerk? Now, Kraftwerk is an absolute band. They are a band. They were formed around about 1970. They came out of the sort of avant-garde krautrock movement. On the first albums, they're doing sort of rock extemporization with avant-garde overtones, experimenting in the studio, very similar to what Pink Floyd was doing at the same time. But they developed towards this sound. Now, the fact is, Kraftwerk are the most influential band in history. You may not like that, and you may not like Kraftwerk, but there are more bands out there that took direct influence from Kraftwerk than took from the Beatles. So when we listen to Africa Bambaataa, that is a sample of Kraftwerk, right? So they lay the foundation for the sound of hip-hop, right? So in the DNA of how hip-hop sounds, it's mostly Kraftwerk. If we look at the post-punk bands, if we look at any of the sort of electronic bands that came out in the UK, like Human League or just think of name Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, you know, they also were so indebted to Kraftwerk. The influence on avant-garde music, the influence on computers, programming, drum machines. Kraftwerk is undeniably the most important band in history, and they didn't get on the list. This shows that the guys at Billboard are not thinking of this through thoroughly. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think their criteria is when we get to the end of this, and it will be a challenge to the orthodoxy, which is actually the problem. So let's move on. I'm a big progressive rock fan. Prog rock went on to sell millions and millions. In the 70s, some of the biggest bands in the world was ELP, Jethro Tull, and yes, they were filling stadiums. But we can really point to one band that was hugely influential on that genre and then went on to be influential on the genres of prog metal, very dark thrash metal, and that is, of course, King Crimson. King Crimson do not feature on this list whatsoever. Why? Because they give a nodding, acknowledgement of Pink Floyd in their list. Of course they do, because Pink Floyd is one of the biggest bands in history and probably made one of the greatest albums of all time, Dark Side of the Moon. But I would say, in terms of musicians and influence, I would say that Kraftwerk are a greater influence on, well, without doubt, me, and so many other musicians I know have taken so much more instrumentally from King Crimson than they have from Pink Floyd. So it's really interesting that they miss this off, and the reason is because they are myopic when it comes to prog. And even though prog, as the stigma around it has decreased, because people just have to acknowledge, the staying power of these incredible bands and the love that people have for the albums that they made, right? There is still, amongst the critical elites, a sort of short-sightedness when it comes to prog. It doesn't get considered in the same way as, say, post-punk bands or some of the sort of college American punk bands, which will be on that top 50 somewhere. All of them will be there. I don't even have to look. The Stooges will be there. The Ramones will be there. They'll all be there. Whether Patti Smith will be there, I don't know, because Patti Smith's a solo artist, you see, and this is the problem of the category. The category starts to get stressed. This is the one that really gets to me. It's so bloody obvious they're going to miss this band out. And they're so wrong to do it. There is no Rush on their list. Rush existed, and they still exist, even after being around for 50, how many years is it? 55 years, right? Even with the death of their drummer, they're returning. And why are they returning? Because the love for that band still exists, and it exists around the whole world. And when Alex and Geddy go out on tour with their new drummer Anika, right? Everyone will turn up. This is a powerhouse of a band. And what's even more remarkable, and I find this a wonderful thing about the world and humanity, is the fact that a band like Rush that sings about actually very difficult subjects, philosophical subjects, has very complex music with all sorts of conceptual continuity running through it. They are a sophisticated band. Now, not sophisticated in the way the critical elite think is sophisticated. But for me, discovering Rush at sort of 13 years old opened me up to so many new ideas and opened me up to so much new music. This is a mighty stadium-filling band, and he never seemed to diminish. Never. Right, I'll just give that a twiddle. Right, we're still going. I've been having a problem with my audio. If you watch some of my videos, they sort of drop out halfway through. I need someone working for, I need a minion. Old Rick Beato's got a minion, hasn't he? But then other people are able to do it on their own, but they're probably more organised than me, you see. And they probably edit it as well. So I don't like editing. I like it just to roll. I like it to be warts and all, right? Hopefully the next band on the next band on the list, I will be able to integrate the idea of warts in. No, it's not Motorhead. But I notice that Steve Howe is sporting some quite, he's some pretty incredible sort of adornments on his face that he has created himself from his own flesh. Whether they're warts or not, I don't know. And see, categories matter. I don't want to say that they are warts. They might not be. Those things that Lemmy had on his face, I don't know if they were warts, But anyway, yes. According to my... I can't believe they're not on. I made these notes and now I'm doubting myself. How can they have the top 50 bands of all time and not have Yes on? How can you do that? I mean, how many millions of albums have they sold, right? And how many... this is the thing that gets to me. If we were looking at the top greatest albums of all time, you look at the top 10, Close to the Edge is not going to be on that list. Anybody with a set of ears knows that Close to the Edge is one of the most remarkable audio creations in human history. For a bunch of guys at the studio in their early 20s, with just tape and multi-track, no like computers being able to cut everything together, to be able to write something so sophisticated that integrates so many different styles together and wrap it around lyrics that are almost poetic and metaphysical. But of course, when John Anderson does it, it's not sophisticated. Bob Dylan can be metaphysical as much as he likes, and you have poets that can be all sorts of abstract and weird, T.S. Eliot and James Joyce, But who would say that John Anderson is the James Joyce of rock music? Nobody would, because there's no respect for these bands. Really, there is no respect. And that's why they omit a huge band like Yes. The next band is not on the list. This is incredible. As an actual band, if you were to start to measure a band in terms of the amount of hit records they've had, the amount of records they've sold, the charisma and looks of the band, all that pop stuff, their musical ability, their arrangement ability, their innovation in terms of new styles, their innovation in the studio, I would say on that vast criteria, the greatest band of all time is The Police. Now, why does The Police not get a look in? I'll tell you why. Because although he's so incredibly talented, Sting sometimes writes songs for people. Songs that will reach deep in their hearts. Sometimes very simple songs that will cut right in, the hardest thing you can do. Phil Collins is another example of somebody who can do this. And because he's written songs like that, even though you don't have to look far to see stuff that has a punk edge or an avant-garde edge, especially the Police catalogue, because Sting has written things like Fields of Gold, and the critics, have to pay a grudging respect to that because they know how hard that is to do. Because Sting is Sting, and because Sting won't play the game of kowtowing and doing all the false modesty, I don't see him as sort of boastful or arrogant whatsoever. And I've met Sting, and he is perhaps the most down-to-earth rock and roll superstar I've ever met. I've only met 3, Robert Plant, Van Morrison, and Sting. And when you got Van Morrison in the mix, it's not that hard to come out, seeming like a normal human being. Anyway, The Police is not on the list. This is ridiculous, right? At one point, they were the biggest band in the world. And the thing is, they were there for 5 years. They killed everything, everybody, on every single record, gigs, record sales. They came up with perhaps the biggest record in history, which is Every Breath You Take. Name something bigger than that. And then when they were at their peak, they called it a day. It's almost like an absolutely perfect, performance from one of the greatest bands. There's no crappy albums later on. There's no comeback tours that nobody wanted to go to. When they did decide to come back in 2008, of course, like Rush, another incredible power trio, who in the end ended up in the 1980s copying the Police, as did everybody else, it filled stadiums, and I was in one of those stadiums to see it, and very proud I am to have seen that band. So Van Halen, now they are in the top 50, but they are not in the top 20. This isn't as serious of an omission because they did put them in, but I think they need to be higher on the list. Why? Because I'm a rock fan, right? And in America, in the late 70s, rock was over. The bands that were about were like REO Speedwagon or Foreigner or Journey. And I like Journey, but it's not a hard rocking band, is it? It's not like ZZ Top or Lynyrd Skynyrd, right? Rock was dying in 1979. And Van Halen came along and saved it. Now, as a band of musicians, it's almost like the perfect mix. They fit together incredibly. And like great, sisters and brothers that can sing together, the link between Alex Van Halen, vastly underrated, and Eddie Van Halen, there's a genius going on there in terms of instrumental rock music. And then they have one of the greatest frontmen of all time, someone who had a deep understanding of American vaudeville and knew how to entertain, knew how to put the white gloves on and do all that. And rock needed that at that time. And then poor old Michael Anthony sat in the background, as solid as rock, with an incredible bass sound, adding these incredible Beach Boys, Crosby, Stills and Nash type vocals, right? And at that point, you see AC/DC bringing in the backing vocals, and then Def Leppard are bringing in the backing vocals, right? So there's a line from, the Everly Brothers through to Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Byrds through to the Eagles, and then into rock music via Van Halen. They did so much more. Now, did they sing about girls and partying? Well, yes, they did. They did do that. And they brought a partying aesthetic back to rock and roll. There's nothing wrong with that. The Ramones do it as well. They're not as rebellious as the Ramones, but you feel that you would have a better party with Van Halen than you would with the Ramones. So I have no problem with that. They also greatly influenced all the sort of hair metal bands in the 1980s, some of which were amazing, like Guns N' Roses, for example, or Bon Jovi. Great bands, and some of them not so good. Right, so, oh yes, of course, Eddie Van Halen changed the standard of virtuosity for rock and roll and redefined the guitar. How much have I got to go on about? Okay, because when you look at their list and you think they put Heart in there, and Heart are a great band, but are they really better than Van Halen? Right. This is one that is not on the list and I think should be on the list, but this is a bit of a contentious argument. When I was a kid, being a prog fan and a future fan, I wasn't a fan of punk. A lot of the viewers of this channel aren't a fan of punk. But as time has gone on, I've understood the contextual background of that time and gone back and listened to whether it be the Dead Kennedys or the early Clash albums or the Stranglers or the Damned or the Sex Pistols, right? I can see how sophisticated that music was, and I hear it with a new ear. And they did bring a sort of dirty, sort of homemade aesthetic back to rock and roll. It was so important. We wouldn't have had the new wave of British heavy metal, for example, here in the UK if you hadn't have had punk. And if you hadn't had the new wave of British heavy metal, you wouldn't have had thrash metal and all that type of thing. I think for me, the real genius of punk is John Lydon. And John Lydon had a long track record of really making incredible records and not being hemmed in by the category of punk, but being inspired by the ethos of punk, which for me, the Ramones and Patti Smith didn't have, but the Dead Kennedys do have. And John Lydon, we can argue about how much he contributed to that aesthetic, But on leaving the Sex Pistols were always a cross between almost like an art punk band dealing with very complex sort of nihilist and anarchist ideas, but also like a manufactured pop band. And their manager, Malcolm McLaren, played that off. But I think artistically, John Lydon was the genius. So on leaving the Sex Pistols, he then goes on and forms the band PiL. And those albums are all, they're masterpieces, right? I believe the greatest album of the 1980s is PiL's album. I think Metal Box is staggering in its brilliance. And the challenge it has, not only to rock and roll bands of like, this is just plug in, and just play, but also to musicians. There's a certain aesthetic that PiL has. I'm not saying they invented it, but you feel that bands like Sonic Youth and then later on John Zorn, they have a rooted and edginess that PiL have. The debut album contains some incredible songwriting, as did the Sex Pistols. So I think PiL need to be on this list, and they're not. Right, I feel that this band really is one of the greatest bands of all time. It's a British band called Madness. Now, Madness, I cannot find the words to explain how incredible Madness are. These are working class lads from London. Some of them were sort of involved in crime. Some of them went to prison. But they loved ska and they had a punk ethos. And in the aftermath of punk, they then brought to this the same aesthetic that the Beatles and the Small Faces and the Kinks brought to rock and roll. And they brought it to rock and roll as sort of, knees up, here comes knees up Mother Brown type of Chas and Dave aesthetic. But through incredible arrangements, interesting chord progressions, incredibly sophisticated songwriting, where the chords and the parts and the instrumentation isn't just there to impress, but actually tells the story of the song. I cannot think of a band greater than Madness, that when you put one of their records on, you get pulled straight away into the story, almost like they're a country band. And in a way, they are like a British country band. Madness just are one of the greatest bands of all time. And they need to be in the top 20. Now, I don't know how much success they had over in the States. I think Our House is known there, but not much others. So that's the problem we've got here, is that us, Britain, as we can see in this list, right, of 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 8, 9. Nearly half of them come from the United Kingdom. And I didn't include U2, who are from Ireland. And they're not from Britain, they're not from England. But they were still influenced heavily by the scene that came out of this country. So I could put them in 10, and then I forgot The Clash, of course, which I always try to do. So that's 11. So over half of these bands come from this tiny country. Okay? So it might be worth having a look at some of the other bands that aren't that well known in the United States of America. The two obvious ones being Status Quo and Slade. And in terms of actual bands, in terms of chart performance, in terms of the incredible charisma and the ability as a band actually get out and playing live, Slade are hard to beat. I wouldn't argue they should be on the list, but that is why Madness aren't on the list at all, and they should be. Right, another band that I think is not on the list, and I find this really surprising, is The Doors. Before rock is defined at the end of the 1960s and we start to get the heavy metal bands coming in, America starts off, we got the MC5, they got Iron Butterfly. They have bands like The Seeds and a few other bands that they're mixing garage rock, psychedelic rock together. And then us British come in and we get Led Zeppelin up and going, and we get King Crimson, then we get Black Sabbath, we get Deep Purple. And hard rock and heavy rock, that heaviness that emerged in the end of the 60s. When you look at the American bands before then, and I'd be thinking of sort of like Jess and Airplane, Love, and The Doors, that aesthetic is much more related to, well, the influences on The Doors are really coming out of sort of bossa nova, really, and jazz, okay? But Jim Morrison represents for me the sort of superstar that Elvis Presley was, channeled through a sort of Nietzschean aesthetic, you know, where it's like he becomes like a sage or a crusader. Whether Jim Morrison actually was, I think he was a little bit of a fraud in a way. But having said that, the charisma of the guy and the vocal delivery, now that vocal, you know, has influenced everybody from Brian Ferry to David Sylvian to Iggy Pop to Anthony Kiedis. There's a power to Jim Morrison, and he's backed by an incredible band. But it's Jim Morrison's heaviness on that first album, The End, which for me, 1965, I think it was recorded, came out in 1966. The End is perhaps, it's in the top 3 greatest moments in rock music. The Doors are heavy. The Doors really are the greatest American band of the 1960s, not the Beach Boys, okay? Not the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys were a surfing pop band in the early 60s that wrote some great pop songs in the same way as the Shadows did over here in the United Kingdom. But they did have a genius in the band, and Brian Wilson, driven by some sort of malevolent, you know, jealousy of the Beatles, tried to take them on and nearly took the Beatles on with Pet Sounds. I don't think it's in the same class as, say, Revolver or, you know, Rubber Soul. Sorry, I don't. But it's an incredibly arranged album, but no greater than what Frank Zappa was doing. In fact, not as great. And actually, Frank Zappa utilised the sort of same group of sort of West Coast session players, and they brought a lot to it, you know, the Wrecking Crew, that type of thing. So I doubt whether the Beatles are as great. They're great, and I've got to tell you, I love the early Beatles, and there's a couple of songs on Pet Sounds I love. And Good Vibrations, again, what's that, 1966? That's in there as well. Good Vibrations is just sublime. But it's the Doors. The Doors should be the American band. If you want to put something up that goes against the Beatles, and as soon as you put them up against the Beatles, they showed the Beatles up, because the Doors show up that cheeky chappy thing that was great in the early 60s, but the Beatles flounder because of that. Right? I'm going to do this when I talk about how Jimi Hendrix took the Beatles out. But the Doors as well, there's a heaviness and there's a sort of, you know, it's like rebelliousness that the Beatles never had. So those are the bands that I think should be on the list. Now, there's a couple of others that I would put on if I was doing it. You know, I would argue for these, and I could understand that somebody not wanting to put them in the top 20, but I think these should be considered. Soundgarden. You know they're going to go for Nirvana, but Soundgarden were huge. They sold millions of records. As a band, I think they were greater than Nirvana. As a singer, Chris Cornell was greater than Kurt Cobain. And as a songwriter, I think he was greater. You know, Smells Like Teen Spirit and Heart Shaped Box are incredible songs, and I love Nirvana. But Black Hole Sun is one of the greatest songs ever written. And it's so sophisticated and so dark. Matt Cameron's one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. And Soundgarden have a run of albums that goes from a sort of chaotic, you know, American post-punk approach to stadium-filling rock. And on that journey, they didn't make a bad album. They are really an incredible band. And I think Soundgarden should be considered. And it would be a brave man to whip Nirvana out of that list and stick Soundgarden in. But for me, if you were just to say who's the best band out of Nirvana and Soundgarden, for me, it's Soundgarden. This is really outer limits. For me personally, one of the most head-frying bands, one of the most talented, innovative, ground-breaking, ground-shaking bands is a British band that hardly anyone's heard of. And it is Cardiacs. Now, there are certain people in the world that can't take cardiacs. And I understand that, right? Cardiacs, it's like 500 volts. That's what it's like. This is a band that mix prog, metal, punk, English absurdism. And even then, he doesn't explain what they're like. There's an incredible band, and these could well be on this. They should at least be in the top 50. There's an incredible band called The Residents. And The Residents really influenced Primus. Now, Primus are a pretty way out band. And I'm sure that they were in the top 50, and they're a great band, but they're weird, right? But I always felt that Primus were a little bit of a one-trick pony, although that trick is very, very enjoyable. But Cardiacs are something else. Imagine The Residents crossed with King Crimson, with Captain Beefheart thrown in, right? And with Edward Lear as a lyricist. It's Cardiacs are one of the greatest bands of all time. If you haven't heard of them, and you probably haven't, and they are so niche that the fact that I've said that they should be on the 20 greatest bands will have waves in the world of Cardiacs. Of course, I would say, if we're just talking instrumentally, if we're just talking a band, if we're just talking of 4 or 5 people on stage playing, who's the greatest band of all time? You know what it is. It's the Mahavishnu Orchestra. If you're just going to talk about great bands, let's talk about the Mahavishnu Orchestra, because that's the greatest band of all time. They should be there just to represent that, you know, we aren't just snotty elitists that are only going to judge bands on how cool they are. Let's try and actually judge them on how insane instrumentally they are. There's nothing wrong with that. Classical musicians do it, painters do it, poets do it. You're not allowed to do it in rock and roll. Why? Because it makes the critical elite feel inferior. Earth, Wind and Fire, for me, are one of the greatest bands of all time. I'm always astonished by them. A lot of people say ELO. Was ELO on the list? Because if they should be in the top 50. See, there's omissions here. There is omissions. You see, the thing is, Billboard magazine, people sit up and listen. So a bunch of 30-somethings working in, that happen to get a job at Billboard because their uncle knows somebody who's sit in the office and say, what do you think the greatest band is? Rupert. They're American though, aren't they? They're not British, aren't they? I don't know what a posh American accent's like, but that's what's going on, and they all pencil in and they all move it around. I should be called up. Why aren't I? I make a living out of saying who's good and who's bad. So why wasn't Billboard saying we get Andy Edwards in? And then they'd be sat there going, he's put Cardiacs on this list, and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, who are they? We can't have this. They'd be ringing me up. I said, you'll put them on there. Yeah, but no one's heard of him. Oh, so that's your criteria, is who's heard of him. Why don't you just put a list of who sold the most and then the less, which is pretty much what they've got. It's not far off. Bloody useless people. Is my recording still going here? Yeah, we're still going. I just snorked then. I don't know if you picked that up on the mic. Did you hear that? I was like real, like that. My old adenoids tried to, express how bloody. My whole life I've been annoyed at trying to find out about the music I love, reading magazines, reading rock encyclopedias, then going on websites, reading, and being told that I got to buy albums by the bloody Clash and Patti Smith, right? And then being stupid enough to do so. It's narked me, and it took me a long time and a certain age to go, you know something? They don't know what they're talking about. This is one of the biggest mission statements. Is going forward, I would love to put out into the world that when someone starts going on about somebody with haircuts like that, and it's all angular, and they're all going, ding, 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 I feel so depressed, I want to destroy the world, and all that type of thing. As soon as they're doing that, you should go, oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, and if you like it, it's great. But as soon as someone's harping on about, it's absolutely brilliant, debut album's so good, by the third album, they become too commercial, but I was there right from the start, blah, blah, blah. Once you get to that, that's what you always have it. Now, the question is, and I've talked about this so many times, I haven't bloody finished, have I? I'm not too sure whether Rage Against the Machine is on that list, but God, they're one hell of a band. Really are incredible. They should be there. I ain't going to go on about them. And also, I think Santana, I think they're on the list, but there's an argument for putting Santana up much higher. Don't you think? You know? I can't think of a band that's travelled from making an album like Caravanserai to making that Supernatural album selling about 80 million copies. Who else has done that? I know the Eagles sold a ton of records, but did they ever make an album like Caravanserai? Right? Which is like going to some bloody Indian temple and taking LSD for a week. This is it. Oh, I do get wound up. So, I might take this information and fashion it into the 20 greatest bands, but what would be much more fun would be for you to do it and add your own in. And then what I will do is I will take all those lists and I won't read them and I'll just go off and do whatever. Now, I won't actually. I'm joking. I might collect them all up. And you guys, rather than Billboard just asking all their privileged mates who's the best band is, why don't we do it here? And I'll put it in the title. Who are the 20 greatest bands? You tell me. That's what it's going to be called. And there I have been able to fashion the climax of this video. Because now it's on the thumbnail, all the way through this, you will be expecting that to be the punchline. And I'm moving towards it. Yeah, you're going to do it. And then I will add it all up. And I will do all the statistical analysis. I won't really. I will just add him up and do an average. But that's what I will do. What sort of average will you do? Will it be a median average, or will it be a modal average, or are you going to use just the standard mean average? Because you can't just do that. You have to take other things into account. I'll do whatever I bloody want on my channel. I tell you, 2026, I've come back more aggressive, you noticed. It's because of Rick Beato. I'm full of myself. I am full of myself. And even with God trying to let me know, Andy, you shouldn't be full of yourself, I can take your channel away just like that. It hasn't worked. So, I want to... What are you shouting for? You got a microphone right next to you. I'm shouting, aren't I now? I've got so worked up, I'm shouting. You don't need to shout. Right, where's me Roger Waters sample? Right, so... you, in the comments, put your top 20 in. Go on. Write it down now. You've had a good think. I've mentioned some bands, but if you think, well, it's ABBA. ABBA should be on there. Whatever you think should go on there. You can put whatever you want down. Well, I was going to say even modern bands, but do we really need to put any of those up? Really? Do we need to have bloody... a modern band? And he doesn't know any modern bands. Do you see him there? He knows his stuff, but so did you get past 2000, which is like 25 years ago? He's in no man's land, that bloke. Name a modern band, Andy. I don't know, Arctic Monkeys. Yeah, how long have they been going for? About 20 years. I've got them in the head. They are there. Weekend, is that a band or is that a rapper? I ain't got a clue. That's a trouble with bands now. There's no such thing as a band. No, it's got to be up to 2000. I'll give you a bit of leeway, but no modern bands. If you do that, right, I am just going to not include it. But if it's like Porcupine Tree, I see you just contradict yourself. I'll just do what you want. I'll work it out. But don't expect a high degree of objectivity with this. But you're involved, aren't you? Do you feel involved? It's always nice to feel involved, isn't it? You're there now, going, licking your pencil. Oh, yes. I can do something now. I can have my little input to the world, But he might not be little because I'll be reading them out on here. I'll be doing the whole thing. Like a Saturday morning kids program. You can all get involved. I might even have a competition. You can ring in, Maybe you want to swap some stuff with someone else. I could call it something like record swap. How about that? We could have a live stream record swap. It's not going to. I ain't going to do it, Andy. You're just bloody showing off. All right, then. I think that's the end of this video. I think that's it. So get your list down there. Join the club. If you aren't subscribed, you got to subscribe now because you want to know when this next video comes out. See if your list's on there. So don't be writing lists if you're not subscribed. Go and join Patreon and all that type of thing, and go and look at all the clubs, the memberships here, and all that type of thing. And sign yourself up to that. I'm done. Thank you for watching this one, and I am now going to do my video, and you can look forward to this one, which is going to be called How Jimi Hendrix Destroyed the Beatles.